Hello, Chicago, and welcome to a big time Monday night mega $1 million edition of the voice of the Chicago sports fan. This is Chicago Sports Podcast, Monsters of the Madhouse. Friends, we have a treat for you tonight. Our special guest is a timeless pro wrestling legend who entertained millions of fans worldwide as one of the most charismatic and colorful villains in sports entertainment history. Taught us all the hard way that everyone has a price and will gleefully remind us at every evil turn that he's rich and we're not. Hiring Andre the Giant to steal the WWF World Championship belt from Hulk Hogan, bankrupting a corrupt referee's plastic surgery to pull off the heist, trying to bribe WWF Commissioner Jack Tunney, and every weak-minded soul creating his own $1 million belt, kicking basketballs away from young children. Ted DiBiase gave us a heel like we've never seen before. He was must-see TV before must-see TV. He was a pure guilty pleasure whose work still resonates with fans today. All the while, he was one of the best technical wrestlers on the planet. He is a one-of-a-kind WWE Hall of Famer and entertainment personified. He is the $1 million man, Ted DiBiase. Ted, my friend, welcome to the Madhouse.
Hey, good to be with you guys. I'm happy to be here. And again, I guess my good friend Eddie Payton's got something to do with this, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Eddie's a great man. I just love him. Way back when Walter was still alive, I had the opportunity to go hunting with both those guys, and they're just, stellar. They're stellar. They're they're the cream of the crop. So
a big fan of ours, big fan of our creative executive director, Brandon Trax Hyatt. So thank you so much for your time. Folks, I am Cleet Soup Campbell, along with the great American DJ Matt Cooper. If you have any questions as we go through the night tonight for Ted, get in that chat room and send us your questions. If we have time, we'll try to pass them on to the $1 million men. I guess, Ted, if we could start it off where it all began for you. You were the adopted son of the legendary Iron Mike DiBiase, literally born in a wrestling ring. Do you feel like, was it your destiny to follow your dad into the squared circle, or did wrestling keep calling you back every time that when you might have had other interests career-wise as a young kid and man?
Wrestling is always what I wanted. Yeah. And again, my father, yes, he was my stepfather, but he was, I was 5 years old when he came into my life. So that's the only father I ever knew.
Yeah.
And Mike DiBiase was the son of Italian immigrants, born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska. And, went in the Navy during World War II. And I can't remember when all of this came down, but I think it was 1946. He won the AAU, National Heavyweight Wrestling title, amateur wrestling, real wrestling, the real deal.
Yeah.
And then he went on and he lettered at Nebraska 8 times, 4 years in football, 4 years in wrestling, and then went on to be a star, as big a star as you could have been during the territorial days of wrestling. I mean, he made a name for himself everywhere he went because he was just very good at what he did. Very smart guy. He was only he looked like a bulldog. He was only like 5'11", but he had a 22-inch neck. And just enormous thighs, and just I was a kid that never got in much trouble.
That's like Cleet, just like Cleet. Cleet didn't get much trouble either.
Yeah.
Even back then, people had a price for messing with Ted DiBiase. Hey, Coop, why don't you take the next question for Ted?
First off, thanks for being on with us tonight. We got everybody in the chat room. We got Bruce and Atmos and everybody else there. Comedy Dustin right now. So thank you guys so much for watching tonight. A lot of fans of yours on with us tonight here, Ted. And part of the pod, Everybody's Got a Pod, Marcus D'Angelo, a show that I like to catch. And you guys do a very, very good job. I listen to that whenever I can on YouTube, the different YouTube clips. So you talk about going into wrestling and the passion and your wrestling royalty. You got Dory Funk Jr. and Terry Funk. Did they build your foundation then to be the technical wrestler you've become? And then when you started training to become a wrestler, what is something that you took away that maybe you weren't necessarily expecting, even at that time, even with all that training, you were like, oh man, I didn't realize I was getting into this.
Well, here's the thing. Back in the day, back before they had wrestling schools, getting into professional wrestling, it was kind of like, and the spoken language, our own language is called Carney, and it comes from the carnivals. And so, you got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Come on. This is Brett, my youngest.
Definitely the most handsome DiBiase in the family. Just going to say that right now. Definitely the only one in shape.
He's a good-looking guy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm coming to get money from the $1 Million Man.
Oh,
just
boy.
sliding it off the
Yeah,
table.
he's
So.
good.
Money Eat 2.0, Brett.
Where's he come from? Money?
Hey, should have put so many $100 bills in my mouth when I was little.
Yeah.
They're still coming to you, Ted. They're still coming to you for money.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I love you,
Love
buddy.
you too, man. Appreciate you. Have a good night, guys.
Hey, you too, man.
Thank you
I
so
still
much,
go to my parents for sometimes my parents will ask me, and then I'm like, well, I can't say.
Yeah. Brett's great, man.
Ted, you are of course known with creating one of the most charismatic and dastardly villains in pro wrestling history. But pound for pound, you might have been the best technical in the world, wrestler in the world, this side of Bret the Hitman Hart during your day. For you, was it always important for you to put on the best match of the night, whether, Ted, you were wrestling in Madison Square Garden or in Tupelo, Mississippi?
That was the thing. It's kind of like, and that was always what I lived by. And, this was spoken to me from very successful guys in the business, because, especially back in the territorial days, you're going to have great days and you're going to have just horrible days.
Yeah.
You're going to have days when the auditorium is packed, and then you're going to have other days when it's like, you could throw a hand grenade and not hit anybody, but by and large, my dad always said this. Well, he said it, but he never said it to me. This comes, and I was a lot of things that my dad helped the Funks.
Yeah.
My dad and Dory Funk Sr. were best friends. You guys can check this out. My dad and Dory Funk Sr. I think it was the summer of 1966, had a 3-hour and 15-minute Texas death match. I believe it has to be the longest recorded.
Yeah, that's got to be the record by.
Gotta be. And of course, they didn't wrestle for 3.5 straight hours, but the rules of Texas death match, balls don't count.
Yeah,
they can happen anywhere in the building. And they did. They went everywhere. They went into the bleachers. They went into the concession stand. They went out on the street. They went back in. So and actually nobody won. It was a 3-hour and 15-minute draw. Why? Why did nobody win? There was a curfew on the building. The police came in and stopped the match because they had to shut it down. I'm sure they knew it going in. And so, wow, how's that? But anytime that Dory Funk Sr. and my Iron Mike DiBiase got back in the ring, anywhere in that territory, the place was packed.
Wow.
And of course, I learned a lot. I learned a lot from Dory Jr. and Terry. Junior's a little more mechanical. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Very good. I probably one of the greatest matches I've ever witnessed was Dory Funk Jr. and Jack Briscoe wrestling for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. And it was just amazing. It was a 60-minute match. And, to a draw.
Wow.
And, it's like I'm smart to the business, and I was standing on my feet screaming. So anyway, what do you want, kid?
Yeah.
This is Eli. This is one of my grandsons.
Hey, Eli, how are
What's
you
up,
doing?
Eli?
Hey, Eli.
There's a bunch
Welcome
of
to the show.
They're listening to this.
Wow.
So what do you want to tell them?
Everybody get a price.
I treated them well, right?
You have indeed, Ted. Eli, well played, my friend. Indeed. And it's so great to see what you were about, what the $1 Million Man is about today, Ted. And we will get to the important work that you're doing here in a few minutes. But it's great to see you, Eli, Brett, your family. Let's before we go back to the birth of, for my opinion, the second greatest wrestling villain of all time, maybe next to Mr. McMahon. And I think that might be up for the debate sometime. You actually made your WWF debut. Am I correct on this? In the late 1970s. And squared off against a young power wrestler and a student of the famed Classy Freddy Blassie, a young man named Hulk Hogan, and Madison Square Garden, years before Hulkamania ever ran wild?
Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
The first time I went to New York was, I can't remember exactly, but it was like somewhere in the 70s. And this was before, I'm still becoming somebody,
Yeah.
and so I remember, and Vince McMahon Sr. was the boss at that time. He was still the boss, and my last match as I was leaving was in Madison Square Garden, and was with this new guy. And Vince Sr. came to me and he says, Ted, he says, I'm really happy with you. The door is always open. Come back anytime you want. He says, but this guy you're working with tonight, we got big plans for him. He says, I want you to really get him over. And he said, you got it. And I did. I went out and this young guy by the name of Hulk Hogan.
Wow.
And after the match, Hogan was so grateful. He said, thank you so very much. And he said, I promise you, I never forget. Years later, when this again, territorial wrestling, and as Junior came up, and started to take the helm of the ship and everything, I can remember we had a show, and when I first went back to work for Vince. Like the second time, like in '87, and one of the first shows I went to was an outdoor show, and Hogan was there, and when he came up and shook my hand, he just smiled at me and said, "It's payback time." And so and it was, so I, this evil, maniacal, $1 Million Man character, I said, I don't know this, but I would guess this. I always said, if Vince could have been a character in his own show, he'd been me.
Yeah. And
I do know that the idea for this character was his personal idea.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of guys come in with their own thing. But when he met with me a couple times. And he said, Ted, he says, you're very articulate. You're really good on the microphone, and you're excellent in the ring. And he said, I want you, and so, and I said, I'm ready to go. Let's do it. And that was the beginning. And, again, the Hulkster was true to his word. It's kind of like, he's Hulk Hogan. He's the big star, but, he also, was able to help me get over.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Hey, Ted, I got a special guest on my phone right now. That's if you guys probably saw me a second ago. I had my phone right next to me, and I think I got it all kind of close as much as I could. But Eddie Payton, if you can hear me right now, Eddie, can you hear Ted?
Oh yeah, I can hear him. I heard that $1 Million voice. I know it anywhere.
Can you hear that, Ted?
$1 Million Man with the $1 Million mouth. What are you gonna do when the Eddie Payton drop this bomb on you?
What's he gonna drop on me?
I'm gonna drop the bomb and a fishing pole on you.
Yeah. Well, I'm ready for the fishing pole, pal. Let's go.
Hey, I go on every day that ended in Y and Sunday after
Who's a better fisher? Who's a better fisherman?
Hey, listen, I'll tell you what, it's like, and hey, listen, and he deserves it too, man. You talk about a guy that earned his retirement, he did, and he's enjoying it because we don't get to get together often, but when we do get together, it's priceless, and some of the stories that I've heard, oh my gosh, but Eddie's special. That's for sure. Yeah, I mean,
that's what they kept telling me when I was in the 9th grade. Hey, Eddie, you special. That wasn't a compliment, and now you want to hit me with that. Oh yeah.
There's only one. Thank God.
When they made me, they destroyed the mold.
Oh yeah. You got. They didn't break the mold. They destroyed it on purpose.
By unanimous votes. Hey Matt, you don't know what a great guy. You probably do by now because you've been interviewing. But you're talking about a guy who's got it all lined up. He is not only a great wrestler, he is a great spokesman for wrestling, and he's a man of Christ.
Yeah.
Amen.
And we're honored to have him on tonight.
Yeah, and and hey, and so is Eddie, man. Eddie plays and he jokes a lot, but there's not a finer man. I consider him one of my closest friends.
Ditto, my brother.
I only have 3, but
we got the best of 3 on tonight.
Exactly. When did you get 2 more?
Oh, you're priceless, buddy.
Now you're 1 in a million, and they gave you the right name, the $1 Million Man, because you are the one.
Well,
and
checks in the mail.
that's what you told me the last 3 checks.
Trying to tell you something.
I'm gonna tell him something. I'm gonna come off the top rope one night and he go, "Where the hell did that come from?" I am probably one of the biggest wrestling fans that you'll ever meet that's never wrestled. And all the wrestlers that I've been around and known, Teddy is the creme de la creme. He's the cream of the crop.
Well.
Not only how he performs, but he gives a great performance every night, regardless of who he's wrestling or what chump that he's beating up on. He's gonna give you the fans their money's worth, and I'm proud to say he's my friend.
Yeah. Thanks, buddy. Thank you, man. And to what he just said, that's one of the things that like the Funks told me, and my dad never got the opportunity to coach me, where wrestling was concerned. Number one, just because of the nature of professional wrestling, back in those days, you traveled around a lot. I went to so many different schools growing up and everything. And sometimes the money's good. Sometimes it's not. They didn't really want me to be a wrestler, but, and again, this comes from the Funks, and the Funks passed this along, and they said, and I think it was Terry that said, Teddy, he says, when I first started, he said, your dad was right there. And he said, your dad said this to me. He said, son, he said, whether there's 20 people in the crowd or 2,000, you give those 20 people the same show that you'd give the 2,000. And he says, you'll never go wrong because just like, the big crowd, those 20 people, they paid their hard-earned money to see your best. So give it to them every night. And that's what I tried to do.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is what really defines Ted DiBiase, ladies and gentlemen, as a performer. You are watching Chicago Sports Podcast, Monsters of the Madhouse. NFL legend Eddie Payton stopping by to join us. And Ted, Eddie, are you still there?
Oh, yeah. I'm going to stay here until they count me out.
No, but I tell you what, Eddie Payton has never been counted out in his entire life, ladies and gentlemen. Hey, Eddie, we're talking about that. This, like you mentioned, this is maybe the most delicious wrestling villain of all time. I mean, but I think what made it such heel gold, Eddie, is how much fun you had to have playing this character. For you, it seemed like you were just living the dream out there. This character, he seemed like he took the Gordon Gekko mantra of the 1980s, greed is good, and then just took it to 11. Is that kind of how you and Vince kind of envisioned the character, Ted?
Well, when I first sat down and talked with Vince, he says, I have an idea. And he says, it's something that's never been done before. He says, so many things in wrestling have been done and redone and overdone. He said, but this is a fresh idea. And he said, you're very good on the mic. You have excellent ring skills. And he says, I just think you're perfect for it. And he said, the one thing everybody hates, is someone who, by virtue of their wealth, bullies people, flaunts it, throws it up in their face and everything. And I just started laughing right away. And I said, I can't stand guys like that.
I'm not going to be one of those guys ever.
Yeah. And so that was basically the essence of the character. And Vince at the time was so, he told me this, he says, we are, to the best of our ability, we're going to try to make the public believe as much as we can that you're really that guy. And I said, well, how are you going to do that? And he said, you're going to fly first class everywhere you go. He says, they're going to be a limousine to pick you up at the airport, take you to hotel, take you to Coliseum, take you back to the hotel, take you back to airport. So everywhere the public sees you, they're going to see this image of wealth, because there's going to be other guys on those flights with you that are getting in a cab or renting a car, and you're going to be jumping in a limousine. I said, yeah, I'm going to get a lot of heat. All right. I'm going to get a lot of heat with all the boys. But in reality, I didn't, and he said, I don't think you will. He says, because all of them would be saying to themselves, you know what, if I'd had that chance, I'd have damn sure taken it too. So more power to you. And it was, I didn't have any trouble with the guys, but boy, you talk about, I remember flying to New York with my wife, and Vince said, bring your wife with you. And so, and this was for the second meeting, and this is when I'm going to sign the contract, and signed the contract with him. And he said, and then one of his secretaries came in the room and counted out $2,000 in brand new $100 bills to me. And he said, Ted, here's your flash cash. And he said, the limousine is waiting for you. We have a room booked for you and your wife at the, I'm trying to think of the name of that hotel. Anyway, it was one of the, fanciest hotels in Manhattan. And he said, and again, whatever you want to do. He says, and he says, and he had asked me before, what do you like? And I said, well, I like steak and I like lobster too. And so they had arranged for us to go to one of the finest, most exclusive, restaurants in Manhattan. He says, go start being the $1 Million Man. I just couldn't believe it. I mean, it's like, pinch me. Is this really happening? And it was just, I don't know. It was, but it was fun. But it also, I tried to live up to that. I tried to make sure that I didn't let down or anybody else. So.
You know, Ted, with Eddie Payton on with us tonight too. Eddie, the first time I want to ask you about going to maybe one of his shows or being around the $1 Million Man or just being in the audience when you see that reaction, kind of what Ted was just talking to us about the reaction and the kind of the beginnings of the character. Were you ever a time, Eddie, around that when he was in character and seeing the reaction of people around?
Oh yeah, I have. You know, I played in Minnesota for a few years, and they pop through there every now and then. And then they had a show here every now and then in Jackson. I made sure I was in the front row. But, you know, it's unusual for one athlete to envy another athlete's life. But when I watch Ted and what he puts into it and how hard he goes about his craft, most everybody else said they wanted to be like Mike. You know who I wanted to be like?
$1 Million Man.
No, Virgil.
Oh.
Yes. The great Michael Charles Jones, absolutely.
and Eddie, you'd have done a better job too, I guarantee.
In another life, folks, Eddie Payton, the NFL great, might have been Virgil. Eddie, can I take you to a night that I know you were watching along with 33 other million Americans? A night that will live in infamy, Eddie. That, of course, is February 5th, 1988, when our good friend, Mr. DiBiase here, tried to pull the heist of the century when he hired Andre the Giant to beat Hulk Hogan, then tried to get plastic surgery to make Dave Hebner look like a impersonate his brother Earl. And then, like Eddie Guerrero would say, Eddie, lie and cheat and almost steal his way to WWF Gold. Can you take us, for me, this is my all-time favorite WWF storyline, Ted. Can you take us through the evolution of this classic storyline and what made it, Ted, work so well?
Well, I tell you, the thing that made it work so well was the fact that they were able to keep it a total secret until we did it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I didn't know. I didn't know exactly what we were going to do until I got to the building, you know, and so, but, you know, when they laid that all out there and again, this happened, you know, that night, that Saturday night main event was one of the highest rated, most watched events ever on any television. And it was just unbelievable. You know, and again, I had no idea just how big it was. And that, you know, that basically was the setup, you know, for WrestleMania 4. So, you know, so we do the deal. We go to WrestleMania 4, and you know, I end up in the last match with Macho Man. You know, and basically he beats me. And so I say, you know what, I don't need your stinking belt. I'll create my own. And that's how the whole $1 Million belt, you know, came into play. But, you know, that was just, and people say, well, you know, like Ted, you know, it's like, they said, you were so good. He said, you know, and most guys that were as good as you at one time or another were the world champion. And I said, you know, that may be true. I said, but here's the way I look at it. It's a business. It's a business. And I'm not really the world champion. I'm a character, you know, obviously, but if you are the world champion, you have to have the type of work ethic that, I mean, in other words, you got to be able to get a match out of every guy you get in the ring with. You know, and that's up to you. So in that status, I get it. You know, and would have it been great? Yeah, it would have. But you know, I had an unbelievable career, and the whole thing with the $1 Million belt. I mean, the whole thing. Here's what everybody forgets. This is all about me being a heel.
Yeah.
I said, I want to be the most hated human being the wrestling fans have ever seen. I just want to, you know, let them have it, you know, with all of my whatever. And I did. And that was, you know, the deal there. That the audacity of creating my own title and saying, I don't need your stinking belt, because they did the deal where Andre technically beat Hulk, and so they couldn't give the belt back to Andre because he'd been paid off,
Right.
and he couldn't give it back to Hulk because he lost it to Andre.
Yeah.
And so they couldn't give it to me because I didn't really earn it.
Mm-hmm.
So what do? You have a tournament to declare a new champion, and that was the setup for WrestleMania 4.
Mm-hmm.
And WrestleMania 4 is where I met the real $1 Million Man, Donald Trump.
Mm.
The building that we had,
Trump Plaza,
the same building they have the Miss America pageant in every year in Atlantic City,
right.
And it's not a huge building,
Mm-hmm.
compared to like WrestleMania 3. When I saw that, 93,000 people in the Pontiac Silverdome, and that's what told me. I said, I got to get out of here and be there, and that happened. So little did I know that a year later that I would be in the main event at WrestleMania 4.
Hmm.
So,
Ted, you bring up the $1 Million belt, and I'm glad you did, because as us growing up as fans, I know you had the World Heavyweight Championship, the Intercontinental Championship, but that $1 Million belt, as kids, I can tell you, was just as big for us watching that, because we would want that. We would want to see more of that. And I thought a lot.
We would make our own.
Yeah, when you had that feud with Virgil and you ended up losing that belt, and I'm like, oh my God, I cannot believe that actually happened. But to back what you were saying, you were playing that villain so well that you made us like really dislike you, and you put so much into that character. Could you kind of take us into that with that $1 Million belt and losing it, and how that came across?
well, I mean, the whole thing was that's just it. It was my arrogance. It's like, I'm thumbing my nose at Jack Tunney, who's the supposed to be the guy, and everybody, and saying, I'll defend my own title whenever I want to. They shut the door. Grandkids, man.
Oh yeah, I'd say what they're wonderful. They add so much, when they drop in. But like Coop was saying, you brought up a good point, Ted. If you, let's say, the storyline goes where, okay, Andre sells the belt to you. You're a transitional champion, probably what you think, maybe a month, 2 months. Instead, by creating $1 Million belt, you create a storyline, and you create something that you ride with for 3-4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. In other words, it's like, now that I've got my own belt, and I mean, just the thought of that, right? What an arrogant, blah, 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 blah. And that was the beauty of it. It's like, that I can defend my own belt, and like, what was it? Was it Jake Roberts?
Yeah, Jake the Snake. Yep.
Again, you talk about a guy I loved working with. He's one of the best. And again, you talk about another guy that was extremely good on the microphone. Was Jake.
The promo he cut on you at WrestleMania 6. Yeah.
Eddie, you still there?
Oh yeah.
Okay, Eddie. So I want to go back, because let's just pretend. Let's go years. Let's go all the way back to when you were still playing, and let's just say you wanted to get out, and yes, you would follow the $1 Million Man to the ring, and you'd be right there with him. Have you ever practiced any of your catchphrase or your interviews before or after, or any type of move you would do to help him win a match?
I don't need moves. I have moves that have never been seen before. People be standing at the door just to see me drop the load on the next man in line.
I can tell you've been practicing.
Yeah.
When you as good as I am, you don't. I tell you what, I always wanted to be a professional wrestler, and having a chance to be around Ted and watch him and the way he prepared and the way he performed. I mean, The only thing missing from me being the next Ted DiBiase is about 10 inches, about 80 pounds, and a Caucasian look on my face.
I'm confused here.
Oh man, it's funny.
We gave you your opportunity tonight, Eddie.
Yeah.
Well, hey, from one heel to another, you have a good show.
Eddie Payne, guys, thank you so much for coming on with us tonight, man.
Eddie,
Thanks, Eddie. Love you, buddy.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is the NFL legend Eddie Payton joining us on Monsters of the Madhouse. Cleve Campbell, Matt, the Great American DJ Cooper. I'm so honored to be with one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase. Be sure to hit that like button on YouTube, friends, and subscribe. Ted, in a career where you did it all, when you had one legendary program after another with the Hawkster, with the Macho Man, with Jake the Snake Roberts, my personal favorite, your program with Dusty Rhodes. For you, who is your all-time favorite dance partner? Who's your all-time favorite opponent?
You know, with a career as long as I had, and having grown up in the business and everything, it's hard to pick one guy. I mean, it's the guys that were the most significant in terms of the knowledge that I gathered of our business and the how-to, of our business were, again, the Funks, Dory Jr., Terry Funk, Cowboy Bill Watts was my boss. He was the guy who ran and owned eventually all of Mid-South Wrestling. And Cowboy Bill Watts, was a great athlete in his own right, played football at Oklahoma, big guy, and a very smart guy, very intelligent. There's a lot of guys that didn't like working for Bill, and Jake was one of them, and Jake was like, and I took everything in stride, and I became a friend of Bill's, because I realized, when I left Mid-South and I went to, even when I went back to Amarillo, I saw just that it wasn't taken care of as well. And then I went from Texas up to Kansas City and worked for Bob Geigel and Pat O'Connor in that territory for a little while. And but I kept going back to Mid-South. And the reason I kept going back to Mid-South was Bill Watts, because the guy was an excellent promoter. I mean, in his ideas, in the things that he did, it's kind of like, and I was a baby face for the longest time. And then he sat me down and he says, okay, kid, it's time. I said, time for what? He says, it's time to turn you heel. And he said, these people in Mid-South have watched you grow up. They watched you from your very beginning to where you are right now. And they love you. And he says, what would be, it's kind of like, the biggest slap in the face, to the fans, that have idolized you all these years, is that you turn on them. And turn on them, I did, and I turned on JYD. And again, to Bill Watts' credit, Bill Watts is the first wrestling promoter ever back in the territorial days of wrestling to feature as his main character a black guy.
Yeah.
And that was JYD. And JYD was good. Now JYD was, his in-ring skills were okay, but they weren't the best. In other words, there's, but you put a microphone in that guy's hand, oh my gosh, he could cut it. I remember he got an interview on me. He says, DiBiase, he said, you can't come like a cabbage, all head, no rear. You got to bring some to get some. I just started laughing. But JYD was great on the microphone, and And I remember I told Grizzly Smith, and Grizzly Smith, you guys know who Grizzly Smith is?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Jake's dad. And he was the guy that was at all the shows to, settle up at the front and get the money and make sure the guys, if they needed a draw, all that stuff, and tell everybody what they were doing for the night, And so, I told Grizz, I said, look, the first time I wrestled JYD in New Orleans, I am not driving my car down there. I had a Smokey and the Bandit Trans Am.
I love those.
Nice.
I love that car,
Yeah.
And I am not driving that car to New Orleans the first time I wrestled dog. And I said, and Chris goes, why? I said, because it'll probably be on blocks when I come out, And so he said, okay, well, ride with me. I'm neutral. So I rode with him. And of course, that was our first, the first match after me turning on him on television. And so, and of course, he beats the living crap out of me basically. But I find a way to, to screw him again. So we come back next week. Right. And so I go back in the dressing room, I shower and I come out and Grizz comes in there and he puts his hands on his hips. He's looking at me and just shaking his head. And I said, what's wrong? He's just shaking his head. I said, something wrong with the match? He says, no, the match is great. I said, so what's wrong? He said, they slit my tires all out. I said, see, I told you. I said, if it had been my car, I wouldn't have had any tires. Wrestling fans took the wrestling serious back then.
I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you about the territory crowds back then because it was so much different. You hear all the different stories of the different podcasts that I listened to. Because, well, I mean, these days and age, we have social media, we have Twitter, and we have everything where people can go and interact. Back then, you didn't have any of that stuff. So when you were playing that heel, you were really playing that, and you were feeding into what you were saying earlier about playing that character and making it believable. But there was also something different about that crowd at that time. Yeah. And could you talk about a story or two, or some of the things that the interactions that you might have had with being a heel at that time with the crowd and just how much different it was?
Well, the one thing that it's like, the bottom line is, especially if you're going to be a heel, because, and again, this is at a time when, we were still trying to, as best as you could, protect wrestling. It's like trying to make them think it's real. Yeah. It's kind of like, I look at it this way. I mean, I love to watch movies. I'm a big movie buff. But when you walk in the theater, when you sit down, it's a movie. Yeah. But if the characters in that movie are really good at what they do, they draw you into the story they're telling. Mm. And they can make you laugh and cry. They can make you mad. They can make you glad. And I said, there's nothing any different about climbing in the ring and having a match. It's you design that match in such a way that you're going to pull those, those feelings out of the crowd. And that's something that I always treasured doing. And, and one of the reasons why Grizz was, those people, man, I told him, I said, you got your tires slit. I said that my car probably would have been on blocks. They'd have taken my tires. Crazy.
Indeed.
Yeah, I mean, that was, and again, I guess you would say that was when wrestling was we were still trying to kind of protect it. It's kind of like you go to a circus, you go to you see a magic show. That magician, didn't really make a rabbit disappear. I mean, he disappeared, but it's sleight of hand. Yeah. And it was the same thing with wrestling. It's kind of like, and I used to, one of the things I would do is like, I want to be that match where the fans go, those first 3 or 4 matches, they were phony, but those 2 guys in the main event they were mad at each other. Those guys were trying to kill each other. Yeah. You make them make them a believer.
Absolutely. That's when you know you've hooked them. Folks, we are talking to the one and only $1 million man, Ted DiBiase, on Chicago Sports Podcast, Monsters of the Madhouse. Speaking of the era of kayfabe, Ted, you were on both sides of the legendary Monday Night Wars between the then WWF and World Championship Wrestling during the 1990s. One of the great, maybe the second great boom era, a lot of people will believe, for the industry. The wars are being revisited this month on the Vice Network's new documentary series, Who Killed WCW, which is, of course, executive produced by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. From your vantage point, Ted, who and what ultimately killed WCW, which for one remarkable 83-week stretch from 96 to 98 owned the WWF in the ratings?
It's really, I don't think that you can put your finger on any one thing. But here's the difference. To me, Vince McMahon, kept producing new stars.
Yeah.
Vince knew how to make a star.
Mm-hmm.
And the guys that left WWF and went over to WCW, and eventually, I made that move too, but I had other reasons for doing it, but I wasn't mad or disappointed or anything with Vince, and in hindsight being 2020, I probably would have been better off if I'd have just stayed where I was. But, all the stars on WCW were stars that were made by Vince McMahon.
Yeah.
WCW didn't make one new star.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, maybe, who was the guy?
Maybe this guy, Goldberg.
Goldberg, I guess could be the one new star, but other than that, and I just, it's, and again, I don't have anything against Eric Bischoff, but, Eric Bischoff, what, I'm sorry, Eric, but what the hell do you know about wrestling? And that's who they got running the show.
Yeah.
He doesn't know squat. He's totally dependent on the guys there, the top guys there. And by this time, by this time, I wasn't an active player. In other words, I was a man in a manager's role. I was in a manager's role, and I'll be honest with you, I wasn't really thinking that hard about wrestling anymore. Because the other thing in my life had changed, and I was really concentrating. And I told them this. I said, because when they brought me in there as a heel manager, and and obviously because of the whole my character, but I told them, I said, you might start thinking about maybe turning me babyface, because you're going to be seeing me on Christian television a lot. Because I'm going on there and I'm sharing my story, I'm sharing my faith, and they're seeing the real Ted DiBiase. And, it's kind of like that, you hate for anything to break that, you know what I'm saying? If you're a heel, and, then you want the people to see you as a heel every time they see you. But now if they start seeing who I really am, then it changes. And then they turned me babyface and put me with the Steiner brothers, which really didn't make a whole lot of sense.
I remember that.
And I was just, I just basically told them, I said, look, I said, I'm not, I was on a guaranteed no cut contract. And I said, I'm not going to go out here week after week and stand in the corner and just be Hulk Hogan's belt bearer. I said, I've spent too many years in the business establishing a name for me to just stand in the corner with my thumb up my rear end. And I said, if you can't think of anything else for me to do, I'll just go home. And that's what I did. And so, and that was the end of that.
But before, and thank you very much for your time tonight, $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase. We got a few more minutes with you here on Monsters of the Madhouse, Chicago Sports Podcast. Before we get to your post-career and all the great work that you've done, I want to ask you about right before you left to go to WCW, you managed Steve Austin. And I remember watching those matches because I was a huge Stunning Steve Austin fan in WCW.
Yeah.
And then he comes over as the ringmaster and you were right there with him. And I just want to say, what could you talk about going, because he would go on to be one of the biggest stars of all time, and what he did was just unbelievable. But did you see some of those characteristics when you were with him? And could you talk about some of those conversations maybe that you had with him before you left and before he became on to be that superstar?
Well, I mean, he and I never got to be like buddy, but I mean, I obviously saw, I could tell, that he was going to be a star. I don't think anybody realized just how big a star he was going to become. But yeah, I saw the talent in him, and I encouraged him, and as I left, wished him, the best of luck, and man, he did it. He knocked it out of the park.
And then when you saw that from afar in WCW, were you watching that and you're like, what was your mind just like blown to see how much that took?
Well, it was like, yeah, I'm wondering how long the process is going to take. And then at the same time, I was praying that they didn't do anything to screw it up for him, because that could have happened too. But by the grace of God, it didn't. So.
Yeah, and well, boy, I tell you what, the rest is history. And Ted, like you said, you had good reason when you left WCW in the late '90s because you had another calling, a higher calling, the highest of them all. And your post-wrestling career, Ted, has been built on faith, purpose, education, inspiration. You recount a lot of this in your best-selling autobiography, Every Man Has His Price. For you, can you talk about when you heard God calling you to a career as a minister with Heart of David Ministry? And for you, what has been the most rewarding part of this work, both personally and spiritually?
Gosh, the greatest thing is, it's kind of like, it took a while for me to come to a place where I felt like, this is a calling, and I know that when my wife and I went through a near divorce, and one of my best friends ended up being a pastor who's to this day one of my closest friends, Hal Santos. He was kind of my guiding light, and it wasn't like nobody was thinking about, okay, we're going to start this ministry or what. None of that. He just said, Dad, I think you're ready. And I said, ready for what? He said, I think you're ready to tell your story. And so the first place I ever stood in front of a crowd and gave my testimony, and talked about, what my wife and I had been through and my love for God as a young man and how fame drew me away and how reality drew me back. And, realizing that in committing adultery on my wife, who I love beyond compare, that I had hurt the one person that I love the most for totally selfish, self-serving reasons. And when I came to grips with that, and here's the other thing, I didn't for a minute think that my wife would stay. The confession was horrible. And my wife said this to me. She says, I serve a God of restoration, not divorce. And she said, I'm not sure I'm strong enough to do this, but for whatever reason, this still small voice in my heart is telling me, for whatever reason, to give you another chance. And she says, I won't guarantee you anything. And she said, know this, I'm not doing it for you. She goes, I'm doing it to be obedient to this voice in my heart. And she goes, I might make it, I might not. I might be gone next week. But I told her then, I said, if you'll give me this chance, I'll become the man you thought you married. I'll become the spiritual leader in my home. And God willing, one day regain your trust and respect. And Mel and I have been married now 43 years, and 43 years, three beautiful sons. So we have two. I have my firstborn is Michael, and and some grandkids, as you can see, running in and out. So anyway, but yeah, God is good, and even now, I turned 70 this last January, and I'm like, God, really, am I 70 years old? Man.
Goes by fast.
Yeah. So
time waits for no one, Ted.
I just keep praying that God will continue to open doors. We've been through like a kind of a firestorm here in Mississippi over a bunch of stuff that's just ridiculous. And when it all plays out, we're going to be just fine. But, by the same token, I'm going to just keep, when those doors open, and that's what I keep praying for. God, Lord, open another door that I might go through that door, and that I might share you with them. And so, and until he takes me home, that's what I'll do.
And I feel that too. Like sometimes, like life can be very difficult at times, and all of us have so much going on. But at the end of the day, I know by the end of the day tonight, when I'm getting ready to go to bed, that God's right there with you and He loves you. And tomorrow is a new day for whatever you want to conquer, whatever you want to do. And I just know that, and we all know that through the back of our head.
Yeah.
Folks, this has been Ted DiBiase, the $1 Million Man. When you look at the encyclopedia of the history of not only the WWE but professional wrestling, this is not only one of the all-time great villains, but one of the all-time great technical wrestlers and entertainers. And Ted, when people review your career, when they think back about all the joy you brought them, all the terrific matches and rivalries and programs, what do you hope they remember most? What do you want to be your lasting wrestling legacy?
Well, I just that it's that. I think the people know. I mean, every time I got in the ring, no matter how I felt, and I guarantee you, there were times that I got in the wrestling ring when I had the flu. There were times when I'd get in the ring, we'd start the match, and I'd say, "Okay, throw me out," and I'd roll under the ring and puke under the ring, and roll back in and get back in the, and I would just keep going. Because I loved it, it's like a lot of people go to work every day because, it's a requirement of life. They don't necessarily like what they're doing, or it's okay. But I was fortunate to be in a business where I loved going to work every day, because nothing gave me greater pleasure than to get in that ring and entertain the crowd. And get whatever I was looking for, getting them to love me or getting them to hate me. Either way, I was doing my thing and happy to do it.
Yep. And nobody, if anyone, did it better than you. Ted, thank you so much for your time. This has been an honor and pleasure for Matt Cooper, Clee Campbell, two lifelong $1 Million Man fans, and for all of our listeners. We appreciate everything you've done for us and what you're doing today, and the very important work you're doing. All the best to you and your family, Ted. Thanks again so much for your time.
Thank you for your time. We had so much fun.
Well, thank you very much, you guys. And before I go, just remember this: everybody's got a price. $1 Million Man.
Damn, I was waiting for that.
Exactly. He's Rich Ward now, ladies and gentlemen. That is Ted DiBiase. This has been Chicago Sports Podcast, Monsters of the Madhouse. Tomorrow night, friends, Tuesday, 8:30 p.m., NFL Network's Adam Rank will give us the state of the Bears headed into training camp, which, believe it or not, for folks, is 56 days away from the start of NFL 2024 training camps. For Mac, the Great American.
Hey, Cleet, really quick, I also want to thank Eddie Payton for coming on with us earlier today.
Thank you, Eddie Payton, who put this together. The great Eddie Payton. Eddie, we love you. Thank you so much for your thoughts. All of our great crew: Dustin, Jay Gris, Cheryl, everyone, Demon bringing it tonight. Thank you so much for your thoughts for Ted, and gosh, this has been one of the funnest nights of my career. So until we meet again, friends, Remember, everybody's got a price for the $1 Million Man, and keep living your lives like Hall of Famer Steve Longo with McMichael with everything you've got. Take care, everybody. Till we see you next time. This has been Chicago Sports Podcast, Monsters of the Madhouse.